Today I'm actually very, very excited to bring you the youngest MP in the UK Parliament, and her name is Nadia Whittome. And just stay there and let me add her. Send invite. Send. So I've just sent her the request. Hi,
Hey Monica.
how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm so excited to have you on. I think you're amazing, and you are the youngest MP in the British Parliament. Not only that, you are very vocal on not only women's issues, but the farmers' issues as well. So why don't you introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, I'm super excited to be on, and no, it's great to be able to do this together. So I'm Nadia Whittome. I'm the Labour Member of Parliament for Nottingham East, which for those of you watching outside of the UK is right in the centre of England. It's Robin Hood County. And I'm also the youngest MP in Parliament. I'm from a Punjabi background, so my dad is Punjabi and my mum is Anglo-Indian. Her family are from Kolkata. And yeah, the farmers' protest is something that I feel particularly passionate about as the descendant of Punjabi farmers. Well, I think probably more Punjabi farmer. I think it was mainly my Punjabi, my grandma, who did a lot of work on the farm rather than my granddad, as is so often the case. We can see that that women farmers are very much central to this protest and leading it. So this is something that I've been speaking about in Parliament.
Okay, so let clue us in, like, when did you find out about the farmers' protest? How did you find out? And what was like your thought process when you decided to become vocal about it?
It's something that I've been aware of for several months now. We still have some family in Punjab, so yeah, they're like my cousins have sent horrific images of protesters and workers having their faces stamped on by police. Um, it's something that my dad and I have spoken about a lot. So my grandparents in India were part of the Communist Party and were very active and sort of around Indian independence. So
Yeah.
this is something that's very close to everyone's heart.
I hear you. I think people don't understand. You can take the Punjabi out of Punjab, but you can't take the Punjab out of Punjabi, right?
Right.
So you briefly spoke about, the brutality about, I think you mentioned Ranjit Singh having, his face stamped on by a policeman by his foot. So how do you feel about the brutality that we've seen by Modi's fascist regime against our farmers?
Sorry, your my connection just cut out then.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm saying you brought up Ranjit Singh about how like he had his face stamped on by a policeman's foot. So I just want you to talk about how you feel about that, like the brutality that the Modi regime has shown the farmers. Like even when they were coming from Punjab into Haryana to Delhi, like so much happened. So talk a little bit about that. How do you feel about that?
It's horrific to see the brutality that has been waged on protesters who are standing up for their rights. You know, I think this movement has shown how integral farmers are to our everyday lives. Like without farmers, we wouldn't have food to eat. And it's farmers all across India of all faiths and none, of all genders, of all ages, all castes, who are rising up against Modi's regime. Um, yeah, seeing what they're facing in response, the police violence, the authoritarian crackdown on journalists, activists like Nodeep Kaur, who have been imprisoned on trumped up charges just for mobilising and organising around this workers' protest. one of the things that I'm particularly worried about is the way that, like, this is a workers' struggle, and in an attempt to stoke communal violence, Modi and the BJP and the RSS are trying to paint this as being some kind of separatist, Khalistani fight, when
Yeah.
it isn't. This is a workers' movement. This is 250 million workers in India went on strike. That's the biggest strike in world history. So how dare they paint this as sort of an issue of religious separatism?
I I agree with you there. I think because I always say that the Achilles heel of the Indian government, especially Modi's Modi's government, has always been this kind of ideology of being the largest democracy in the world. However, in the largest of democracies, for instance, in America, the right to dissent, the right to hold your government accountable is considered one of the utmost principles of democracy. They say that dissent is the greatest form of patriotism, because without dissent, there can be no growth in a democracy. And we're seeing a little bit about of the same thing in UK as well, with the recent laws that were passed by Priti Patel. So let's talk a little bit about that. How do you feel about the violations of the right to peaceful assembly? And you spoke a little bit about like spinning it into an anti-national activity, but like, yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, no, that's okay. Do you mean in the UK or in India or both?
Both, because it's very clear that the right to dissent and the right to choose your own government, the right to hold your government accountable, is key in a democracy. And when you see that lagging, whether that's in UK or in India, what does that mean?
It's extremely worrying. The right, as you say, the right to protest and the right to dissent and the right to hold the powerful to account is a fundamental right. That's that's what keeps a democracy functioning. And without that, it's not really a democracy. It's more of an authoritarian regime. And I've said about, so for background, what's happening in the UK is that our Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has brought this piece of legislation, she's rushed it through Parliament, called the Policing, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Bill. And this has come on the back of Black Lives Matter protests, Extinction Rebellion and climate protests. And it's designed to make it more difficult for working people to hold the powerful, to hold the government to account. And it's really concerning, because we've seen this week, I'm sure you've heard about the murder of Sarah Everard, a young woman in London who was kidnapped from the street walking home and murdered, and the man who's been charged with her murder was a serving Metropolitan Police officer. So in the same week that that happened, we've seen this bill being introduced, and that's after women were gathering to grieve collectively, to honour victims of male violence, and violence was used against them by that same police force. And then we're seeing a bill that would then hand police officers and the police as an institution more power, and that's extremely worrying. And it's I think there are a lot of parallels here between what's happening in India and the rise of authoritarianism and the rise of the far right, and what's happening in the UK. And what I'd like us to do is for workers in the UK to be able to draw inspiration from what's happening in India, because yes, the situation in India is terrible. We're sort of descending into fascism under the BJP, supported by the RSS. But we've also got the biggest workers' struggle and fight back in history.
Yeah.
And that is incredible. And that is something that every socialist, every progressive across the world should be celebrating and supporting.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I think what we're seeing in India is like the greatest mark of how democracy can work for the common man. Okay, now that like because you brought up Sarah Everard, I want to ask you because 2020 saw the highest number of women in the British Parliament, but 2021 also saw the murder of a woman. I mean, it's very obvious. I was in a conference yesterday in which they were talking about one in every three women is assaulted or sexually assaulted at some point in her life. How do you make sense of that in your head?
It's something that every woman has experienced, male violence somewhere on that spectrum of violence, and it's exhausting, it's heartbreaking, and it has to end, and that's why we took to the streets this week to march against male violence, whether that's at the hands of the state, our partners, our family members, acquaintances, strangers, even. And we need to dismantle the patriarchal society that we live in that allows that gender based violence to happen. Um, Sorry, there's some interference. I don't know whether it's my line or yours.
No, it's not from mine.
Oh, okay. It must be from me. Sorry.
It's okay. It happens. You're sitting in the UK. I'm in, America. So there's got to be. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you now.
Um,
Yeah, I was gonna say that I think that what you've said is really contrasting. That
mm,
we have the most women MPs since 2020, yet male violence is still endemic in our society.
mm,
And I think that shows how limited representation politics are. That yes,
mm,
representation is important, but we could
mm,
have a 50-50
mm,
gender equal parliament, and we still wouldn't necessarily see that deep structural, social, and material change that we need.
mm,
And that's what I'm pushing the government to do, is to reverse austerity, which
mm,
in the UK has disproportionately impacted women,
mm,
um, to ratify the Istanbul Convention,
mm.
and to more widely sort of make sure that women are paid a real living wage, that we
Yeah.
have secure housing, that we're not in situations where we're trapped with abusers because of financial dependence.
Yeah, that's actually, I agree with that. I do want to say that I follow you on Instagram, so I watch and I follow you on Twitter, and I see like how much voice you've given to this movement, especially after the death of Sarah, and so much respect and power to you. Now, let's talk about the Tory government a little bit. How much of a problem do you see their affiliation with the BJP government? Like, how much of a problem do you think it is, whether like for the world, for people living in England, for the Sikhs living in England.
It's a huge problem, and that's why I used the parliamentary debate about the farmers' protest to draw attention to that, because I don't think it's something that it's spoken about enough. This Conservative government is a close ally of Modi's regime. You know, we saw David Cameron, our former Prime Minister, speaking alongside Modi when he came to the UK. Priti Patel, our Home Secretary, is an active supporter and an unapologetic supporter of the BJP. And then we also see that there are billionaires who bankroll and fund both parties. So in the 2019 election, Hindutva activists mobilised for the Tories,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of us were targeted. I was targeted in my seat in Nottingham East by BJP supporters who didn't want me to be the MP.
Mm-hmm.
I still won my seat with about 65% of the vote,
Mm-hmm.
but that's concerning because there is big support there, and it means that the Tories then pander to Hindutva, RSS, BJP ideology. So, for example, it's caste discrimination is still a huge problem all over the world, but even in the UK. I think in the UK we like to think that we don't have problems like that, when of course we do, and we still live in a very classist society. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not surprising that we also have caste discrimination. But the Tories have been, and when I say the Tories, I mean the Conservative government,
Mm-hmm.
have been very reluctant to legislate against caste discrimination, and that's because of the pressure that they get from the Indian government.
Mm-hmm.
One of the
Uh,
things I think is important to draw attention to actually is the risks after Brexit,
mm-hmm.
because our government is very keen to be trading with India at whatever cost. And now that we've left the European Union, we're economically weaker, we're in a far weaker trading and negotiating position. So the government is very keen to make those relationships with regimes like Modi's.
Mm-hmm. Um, okay. Uh, let's talk about Priti Patel a little bit more. First off, like I was gonna bring up Priti Patel in relation to Jaggi Johal, but because you brought up the trade deal with India, um, how much of a key player do you think Priti Patel is in that deal going through or not going through?
I mean, the situation that we have, Priti Patel is extremely powerful in the UK, and I think her being a woman of colour
Mm-hmm.
allows her to, um, like, historically we've always seen, haven't we, that there have been some people in our communities who have sided with oppressors, and this is another case of that.
Yeah.
Um, and I think Priti Patel, being a woman of colour, almost allows her to be even more right wing and authoritarian. So, for example, she has supported the death penalty in the past.
Mm-hmm.
She refers to BLM activists as
Mm-hmm.
hooligans and thugs. Um, she's probably one of the most right wing conservative MPs.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, she's very influential, but also the Conservatives have an 80-seat majority in Parliament, which
Mm-hmm.
basically means that they can vote through anything they want. And that means that at the moment, as we have a Parliament that is so stacked against the Labour Party and
Mm-hmm.
opposition parties, it makes what happens outside Parliament even more important. So that's why our protests around the policing bill, around police violence, and the murder of Sarah Everard was so important.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's the same in India, right?
Mm-hmm.
What the farmers are doing is all the more important because of the strength of Modi's
Mm-hmm.
government in Parliament.
Mm-hmm. I want to bring it to the Punjabi Sikh diaspora in England and talk about um, Jaggi Johal and the recent extradition cases of the three Sikhs. And I want to talk about it in reference to BJP, RSS, Hindutva influence within the British government because Jaggi Johal is a UK citizen or a Scottish citizen, I think, and the British government has not intervened. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's disgraceful that the government hasn't intervened in this. Joggi Johal is being detained under anti-terror laws in in India. You know, he's a man who went a few years ago to get married for his wedding, and then a fortnight later was taken away by police, arrested, and has been in detention ever since. It's the kind of thing that you couldn't make up. I couldn't imagine it.
Yeah.
Um, I know that the UK human rights charity Reprieve has written to Dominic Raab about this, asking for Joggi Johal's immediate release. And we're told, or the Foreign and Commonwealth Office has told the BBC that that Dominic Raab, that's our Foreign Secretary, did raise the case with his Indian counterpart, but we haven't heard anything since then. So if you're watching this and you're in the UK, write to your MP, particularly if your MP is a Conservative MP, because we need to keep up the pressure on this. It's not enough just to say we're doing everything we can, because we've seen what doing everything we can means in the case of other people who have been detained overseas, other British citizens.
I always say this, that for the Sikh community, because Sikh Punjabi community, because we're a minority community, our strength lies in our unity. When we speak in a unified voice, it's stronger. Coming out against someone is always stronger if we all speak. Jaggi Johal is still in jail because we all of us, have not made enough noise to get him out. So that's just, I strongly urge, like Nadia is saying, for everyone to call their MPs. Um, I have notes in the background, so I'm just referring back to them. So if you see
No,
me,
that's okay.
um, so going back to the farmers' protest, right? What do you see happening? Like, how do you think that's going to culminate?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, and I think, but the thing that I'd want to focus on is to start with just to celebrate the fact that this has turned out to be the largest and longest peaceful citizens' protest anywhere in the world, in the history of the world. And farmers' leaders have said that it will continue, and we must do everything we can to support them to ensure that that continues, because they're protesting and striking and marching in the face, as you know, of an extremely hostile media that is trying to shut down these protests, and even saying that they're running out of steam when all of the evidence on the ground is that they're clearly not. I think this has also widened opened a wider debate on economic reform and the future of Indian agriculture and democracy. Like these laws that Modi is introducing basically hand over agriculture to big companies and take money out of farmers' pockets.
Yeah.
So, and I think what's really incredible about these protests is it's not just farmers protesting, it's it's everyone, every sort of worker and citizen who's protesting in solidarity. And because farmers are responsible for feeding us, they're in a very powerful position.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this can and should continue for as long as it takes to win. And the farmers and everyone in India will have my complete solidarity.
I love that.
If Modi wants the protest to stop, then he needs to repeal the laws.
Facts. Modi wants the protest to stop, repeal the laws. It's either that or I mean what the union leaders are going now is they're basically campaigning against BJP. They're going to all the states that are having elections and saying no, vote to BJP. So I think the pressure is mounting. I want to talk about you. You're the youngest MP in UK. So tell us about yourself. Like where'd you grow up? How did you decide to be a politician? Was this something you always wanted to do? Like, and how was your experience running? When was the first time you ran for office?
Yeah, so I'm 24 and I was elected in December 2019 when I was 23. So that
Wow.
makes me the youngest MP in Parliament, and I'm much younger than the average MP who's sort of in their 50s, I think. Um, for me, honestly, politics was never about it was never about a career, and I never thought of it a as a career option or even something that was about a career. For me, it was about my lived experience and the lived experience of people around me. So I was 13 when the coalition government was elected in 2010,
Mm,
and I've I was brought up, I suppose, under Tory governments largely and through austerity. So for me, I'd seen people on my street going hungry, people being without jobs, my brother working several low wage jobs just to make ends meet. Um, and that's what made me want to get involved in politics. It was, in fact, the turning point for me was the bedroom tax. So in 2013, the Conservative and Lib Dem coalition government introduced this policy called the bedroom tax, which meant that if you live in a council house and you have a spare room, even if that room is used for a wheelchair or for a child who comes to stay at the weekend or as a panic room or, just a spare room, because people have a right to have a spare room in their house if they have a spare room, right?
hmm
Well, the government would tax you for that room. And these are people who had already had their benefits cut, wages were already going down, the cost of living's going up,
hmm
rents are increasing, and that's what the government did. And that made me so angry that I joined the fight back, and then I joined the Labour Party, not because I thought that it was the perfect party, but because I thought that it was a vehicle for change, and I still believe that, because our party comes from the labour movement, the trade union movement. It was set up by working people, for working people, to serve
hmm
the interests of working people.
hmm
And that's what I see my job as being in Parliament.
Wow. Bedroom. So I'm gonna research the bedroom tax because that sounds like nuts. Okay, so you
It
decided
is.
to.
And that was only 3 years into this government, and I remember at the time there had already been so many cuts and things were really difficult, and I thought it surely cannot get any worse than this. This is this is cruel. It's horrific. And then 7 years later, things have got worse. Our
Yeah.
domestic violence services have been cut. Um, Everything has been cut. Like Nottingham alone has lost 271 million from government cuts since
Wow.
2010. And
Wow.
that comes from social services, it comes from people's wages, it's jobs being cut.
That's horrible. Horrible, horrible. It really makes me wonder. So democracy is a government for the people by the people, right? So if you're not really working for the people, why are you in office? Like I always wonder, like you can't be a democratic nation and implement the type of change that is harmful to your constituency. Um, okay, so Nadia, being a woman of color, um, what was what was first off, just being a woman, what was it like running for an election? What kind of things did you face? Was there any type of misogyny? patriarchy?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that runs through every thread of our lives, doesn't it? Um, yeah, I'm trying to think of any specific examples. I think the main barrier that I faced was probably age, people thinking that I was too young and inexperienced. Um, and to that, I'd say that young people do have life experience. We have different life experiences, and there are
Mm,
experiences that need to be represented in Parliament. And I feel very privileged and honoured to be able to do that.
mm,
Uh, I mean, when I came to Parliament,
mm.
one of my colleagues, Kate Green, who's the Shadow Education Secretary, said that there are more portraits of horses in Parliament than there are of women. And I
Wow.
think that tells you everything that you need to know about that institution. It's completely backwards. But if we go back to standing for selection and election, that in itself is a process that is very expensive. So I was working part time. I was applying for temp jobs while I was running for selection and election. Um, and that's something that is a barrier to working class people and women, because women are more likely to be in low paid work, for standing for election. And that means that the people who represent us in Parliament are disproportionately the super rich, people like
Yes.
Rishi Sunak and Priti Patel, who have absolutely nothing in common with the vast majority of people.
And I think that's a problem because in a democracy, the government is supposed to represent the people. And what happens when um, election funding is not, I don't know how to put this because I'm not a politician and I'm just saying it from my understanding, but I think what happens when people are able to fund their own elections or have kind of this like unimaginable amount of wealth is that exactly what you said, you end up having a government that doesn't represent the people. And I do think that's an issue. The other thing is, I think what I've noticed, because I'm a little bit older than you, but like what I've noticed is that my generation, especially coming out of college, it was a lot difficult to get decent paying jobs, even while being educated. Whereas my parents' generation, like even with a high school diploma or an associate's degree, they could get the type of job where they could, buy a house, sustain a family, and live comfortably. And that's after and I'm an American, so college here is super duper expensive. That's after having to take up debt, to go to college, and some people, take out debt to go to grad school. And what ends up happening is that you are barely making enough money to pay back your loans, let alone, have a little bit of savings, buy a house, this and that. And I do feel that sometimes governments do not take that into account. Um, I feel like I talked a lot, but what's your opinion on that? Just the like people who are trying to be responsible with life and still not being able to make ends meet.
I 100% agree with you. Yes, yes, yes. Education should be free. It should be one of the things that the Labour Party had in our manifesto, the manifesto that I stood on, was we would introduce a national education service, which would be a bit like the National Health Service, but free education at the point of use for everybody from cradle to grave.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's disgraceful that, yeah, like you, our generation has been very much defined by insecurity, I think, whether that's housing insecurity, job insecurity. And then for those of us who do dare to dream and dare to go to university, we're
Mm-hmm.
saddled with huge debt. Um, and I myself went to university and then had to leave because it became too expensive for me. The other point that you made about financing elections, this is really important, and I know that it's something that is spoken about a lot in the US because your elections are extremely sort of centered around big money, and you only have a chance of winning in the US historically if you have big money back. In the UK, that's what makes the Labour Party unique and important, because we're funded by the trade unions, and the trade unions are funded by working people who pay their subs every month. So it's about sort of between £6 and £10 a month. And then they can opt in for some of that money to also go to the Labour Party. And that is the cleanest money in politics. And that's why I'm so proud to be a Labour member and a Labour member of Parliament, is that I'm here as a workers' representative for the movement of workers, elected by workers to serve workers.
Okay, so the other thing I want to talk to you about is I want to tie this all in to violence against women. So I read a lot, and I was and I don't know, like CSW is going on, which is like the Commission for the Standard on the Status of Women, and I think one concept that comes up repeatedly is that because of debt, because of, you know, financial illiteracy, or because of these insecurities that you speak of, men, especially in marital relationships or any type of relationships, are more likely that insecurity changes into anger, and that anger then is taken out on the spouse, whether it's verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, any type of violence. That insecurity or that anger or that kind of like mentality that the odds are stacked against you is then put onto, you know, the significant other. And many people argue that that may be another leading cause of violence against women. Obviously, the major cause is that we need to teach our sons better. We need to teach our brothers better. We need to teach our guy friends better. We need to talk about it and speak about it. But the other is that the government has this huge hand to play, because secure, happy people don't go home and, you know, they're not violent. Like, if I'm a happy person, I'm not going to be nasty to you. Do you know what I'm saying? And if our governments were to take care of us, were to take care of our spouses, were to provide that assistance, where the insecurity of what's going to happen tomorrow, am I going to be able to find, you know, to provide food for my family, if that insecurity is gone and a person is just a lot more at peace, then maybe violence against women would not be so bad.
I think it's important to restate that there is that the single cause of male violence is male violence, and obviously the responsibility of that lies with the perpetrator. But you're right that it exists in a wider sort of social context, and that's patriarchy, and it's also economic factors. I think of these more as being about how women are economically constrained, and how, for example, funding has been cut from our domestic and sexual violence services. Funding has been cut from the legal aid budget, which basically massively curtails women's access to justice, and means that when women are pursued by their abusers in civil courts, they often don't have that recourse to adequate legal aid. It's about the fact that that women are on low-paid jobs a lot of the time, are disproportionately single mothers, but also it's about our benefit system, and I think that's something that we don't speak about enough. So in the UK, not only have there been huge benefits cuts since 2010, but also we have a system called universal credit, which can only be paid into a single bank account, and that traps a lot of women with their abusers. In fact, speaking a bit more widely about government policy, a couple of weeks ago, it was the budget that was unveiled by our Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, and I commissioned a piece of research by the House of Commons Library, gender auditing that budget and what impact it would have on women. And they found that since 2010, of all of the net savings to the Treasury that have been made through cuts to tax and cuts to benefits, 92% of those savings have been shouldered by women. And I think that shows just how deeply ingrained misogyny and patriarchy is in our policy. And of course, that is not in itself enough. Individual policies are not in themselves enough. But there are things that can be done here and now to improve the lives of women and to protect women. And I think also that policy change influences social change.
I agree. I do. You know how they say like real life imitates art. I think real life imitates like the people we have in government. I'm just gonna give an example in America. I do think that, for instance, when Trump came to power, a lot of things started to fly. You know, like when people kind of desensitize themselves to the statement "grab them by the pussy," that desensitized people from a lot of different other verbiages that could be considered abrasive, you know, to females. And I do think that the type of government you have and what the government says or does has a huge impact on the people that follow that government.
That's absolutely right. And it's something that we've seen in the UK. I know that Boris Johnson and Donald Trump are often compared to each other, and I think for good reason.
Yeah.
Boris Johnson called Muslim women letterboxes. He referred to gay men as tank top bum boys and other really horrific sort of racist and misogynistic things. And after that, we saw, after in particular the comments that he made likening Muslim women to letterboxes, hate crimes against Muslim women increased. And that language was then repeated on the streets with Muslim women being called letterboxes. So that just shows why the huge responsibility that politicians and the media has to around language and around rooting all of our conversations in people's real lives. Because for a politician or for the tabloid press, this might be a game. This might be about getting another click, about getting a vote. But for the most marginalised people, this is about being safe in their homes, on their streets, in their communities. I've seen that someone has asked if it's a Sports Direct mug. No, it's not. It's a WAP mug.
That you are my girl. Did you just say WAP? WAP?
Yeah. WAP.
I hear you. That I kid you not. If my friends are in the comments right now, they're gonna be going crazy because like my thing is like if someone's saying something right, like if there's a guy who's being like super intellectual, I'm like, WAP, that was a WAP conversation.
Yeah, it was my 2020 most listened to song. In fact, there was this really funny time in Parliament where I've got those AirPods, and I thought that they were connected via Bluetooth, and they weren't. And I was playing WAP like out loud at full volume next to two Tory male MPs.
Oh my God, you did not!
And it was like there's some hoes in this house bit at the beginning, which definitely takes on a different meaning when you're in the house, like the Houses of Parliament.
Okay, I was, because of the farmers movement, a lot of us are in various Telegram groups or Signal groups and stuff, and this is completely off topic because of the WAP conversation. And because I say it so often, we actually had a full-on conversation that people use terms like whore, slut, or any of these derogatory terms towards women to kind of put them down. But then we have women like Cardi, I'm a Cardi B lover, who have now come up and owned that verbiage. They have owned it and used it, to strengthen it, to make it seem like a strong, independent woman who is in control of herself and her sexuality. And I don't know if you're comfortable speaking on this, but for me, I think that was a light bulb, like ownership of the terms that have been used to put us down.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm totally pro reclaiming words, and I think that it's like up to the individual as to whether like that feels right and that feels empowering. The only thing that I'm conscious of around that is that words like whore are used to like disproportionately to perpetrate violence and oppress sex workers in particular. And I think it's something that that community should sort of have ownership over whether like using that word and reclaiming that word if they do. It's sort of a recognition that yes, all of us have been called that, but it's something that is used quite systematically to oppress sex workers, and recognize that yes, all of us, but also some of us more than others.
Yeah, facts. But that was just a huge connect, that WAP Cup. Do you want me to see if we have any questions? Some interesting questions?
Yeah, I've seen some people from Nottingham East and Nottingham, so I want to give a big shout out to everyone from Nottingham. It's really great to see you all on here.
Okay, so Brooklyn Seeks is asked, they asked the question 27 minutes ago. They're asking, do you think this division caused in the diaspora due to the protests are spontaneous or had built-in foundations? Okay, I don't know what Brooklyn Seeks, I'm assuming you're talking about the protests that were put on or were going to be put on at the Seeks. Brooklyn Seeks, is that what you want us to talk about? So, I, are you aware of the pro farmer the pro farmer legislation protests that were going to be put on, I think, in Southall, if I'm not mistaken? Brooklyn Seeks
Oh,
is
are these
saying,
like people supporting Modi?
yeah, that they were going to do a.
Yeah, yeah, I think I mean, I think that they're hugely in the minority. I don't know of a single person who supports Modi or the farmers' laws,
Yeah.
and I know a lot of people. Um, I I think the main thing that I'm concerned about is this being co-opted by separatists, because this is a workers' movement and it's a workers' struggle. And what I don't want to happen is people outside of India who don't have any skin in the game saying, like, yes, this is for Khalistan, when that is having real life consequences for people back in India. Like the RSS and the BJP are using that to throw bricks at protesters. It plays completely into their hands. And I think it's really important that all of us in the diaspora keep restating that this is a worker struggle.
I cannot agree with you more.
All religions, no, people of all religions and none, all genders, all castes. And I think that's the really beautiful, powerful thing about these protests, is that the history of India has kind of been littered with disharmony and disunity, and it's just incredible to see Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, Christians all coming together, united against these oppressive laws.
I agree with you. Like, you just spoke my heart. That it's very important to remember what this movement is about, right? We have we have people, we have our elders, our grandparents fighting for their very livelihood there. And you need to understand what's at stake. Literally their survival is at stake. And to use that to push forward another agenda, it's low.
Yeah,
It's really, really low. And I I tend not to be vocal about this because, I want to keep the community together as much as possible. But it's important to understand that if your cause is justified, do it at another time. Don't take somebody else's, plight and basically take advantage of it. Don't
yeah,
don't do that. You know, that that's all I have to say about
yeah.
that.
Like, don't hijack worker struggles.
Yeah,
That's the tweet.
that's it. That's it. Like, go do your own thing. Like, this is not about you. And honestly, like, you've just spoken my heart there, because it's heartbreaking to see the communal discord um when it comes to that, because there's many people who have the ideology that, Khalistan should exist. I don't. But if you do, you do you, but do you separately, you know?
Yeah,
That. Okay, let's see.
completely agree.
Um, Hold on. For Nadia. Okay, so
Realize
uh
how terrible my lighting is.
wait, what?
I just realized how terrible my lighting is.
Oh, I have a top light as
Apologies for
well.
that. Yeah, I should do that.
Okay, so ex Karina Zero, for Nadia, as a young Punjabi woman myself, you are so inspiring. Please, can you talk about the importance of represented? So, guys, you have to keep your questions small in the question box, because only a little bit shows up. So, I only got, for Nadia, as a young Punjabi woman myself, you are so inspiring. Please, can you talk about the importance of, I think the last word was representation.
Hey, Karina. That's really kind of you to say, and it really makes my day when I get messages like that, particularly from young women and young people of color. Um, I think I would say on representation is important, but it's not the end goal. The end goal here is liberation for all of us, and that's not going to be achieved through representation alone. So I would say, like, yes, we need a more equal parliament, and we need more of us to be represented in parliament, but also we need more democracy in our communities, more democracy in our workplaces. We need people to have more power. And
Mm,
then when people do have more power as individuals and in our communities, then MPs aren't going to be so important.
mm,
And actually, I think it's important that we say that being an MP is one way of making change, but it's not the only way, and it's not even the most important way. And particularly now that we have an 80-seat Tory majority in Parliament, what's really important is what we're doing outside Parliament. And that's what I want to do, is join up what's happening outside and amplify that and give it a platform inside Parliament. So,
mm.
on sort of advice, remember that you do have power and don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
That's so true. Every voice matters. I always, like, when it comes to the farmers movement, I tell everyone, regardless of your following, you matter, your voice matters, your tweet matters, simply because you are making noise. So never forget that. Okay.
Yeah, it's like as individuals, we might not have power individually, but we all have a little bit, and we can all fight back a little bit. And when we do that together, that's when we're powerful. Like, our
That's
power is in our unity,
unity.
in our togetherness.
Absolutely. And that's my point when I talk about as being Sikhs in a minority, like when I was talking about Jaggi Johal, that speak in unison, speak together. People will listen. And that's why the farmers movement has become so strong and so powerful, and like an example, because people came out together. Everyone's speaking, I mean, they're speaking different languages, but their message is the same. And that's important. I'm trying. Okay. We're
Yes.
almost hitting an hour, so but like I want to take one last question. Um, yes, guys, so the live will be saved. All right, let's see. Okay, so Amreen 3, I think this is one of your constituents. Nadia, what can the Punjabi Sikh community do in Northeast about the farmers' protest?
Hey, Amarina. Um, this is a really good question. I think that there is definitely a space for us to do some action in solidarity with the farmers in India. I saw that someone else, Daljit, wrote in favour of a global strike. I would absolutely support that. I think that it would be great if young people in Nottingham from the diaspora, and all young people actually, led on organising a protest, because I think this is something that we feel very passionately about. And I don't know about you, but I think that for a lot of us who weren't born in India, whose parents came here or even grandparents came here, hearing about what is happening in India now, I think gives us a real sense of pride and connection with our ancestry, because this isn't something that we learn about in schools, and we don't learn about the radical history of India. So I think we should harness that. Oh, I can see your comment. Yeah, like, let's, if you're a constituent, then send me an email. It's nadia.whittome.mp@parliament.uk, and we'll book a time in. I have surgeries every week, and we can have a chat about it.
This is great. We're making like direct change. Okay, I think my cousin sent in a question and she keeps messaging in this. Um, oh, Komal, you asked like 3 questions. How can we draw the young people get involved in? How can we? Okay, how can we draw parallels to other global movements that align with ours without undermining them? Okay, so oftentimes what happens is that I think this is what she's referring to because we've had this conversation, like with the foot on the face of Ranjit Singh. When that image was circulating, a lot of people compared it to the BLM, the start of the BLM movement with George Floyd. And the discussion that was being had there was that we don't want to undermine anybody else's plight by comparing it to ours, right? Because everybody's pain in their own eyes is the strongest. So the question is, how do we compare this to other global movements, whether it be the BLM movement, whether it be, you know, the Jewish genocide or anything else, without disrespecting
I
their pain and their movement?
I think the way that we do that is kind of, in short, solidarity. So we sort of celebrate the strength of the resistance elements of these, rather than sort of the oppression elements of it, because comparing oppression isn't something that's ever going to end well. And everybody's, all of these different types of oppression have slightly different structural bases, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
uh, so I think we say there are all of these movements rising up for change, like the climate movement, like Black Lives Matter, like the farmers' protests. And yes, they're all different, but we stand in solidarity together, like between all of these movements, because they're all fighting for change, and they're all resisting common evils and enemies.
Mm-hmm. Facts. All right, so we're hitting our hour mark, and I'm really sad to see you go because this was such an insightful conversation. But Nadia, thank you so much for joining me. Honestly, this was
No,
this was like this was fun.
Yeah, this was so much fun. We should definitely do this again.
100%. I mean, I was floored when you pulled out the WAP cup.
It's my only mug that I've got, and I always drink orange squash. And when I'm on like Zooms, I don't want people to know I'm drinking orange squash because it's kind of a child's drink. I mean, I've just told everyone now,
Yeah.
so yeah, I
Anyhow,
use my mug.
oh my God, I love this, how the universe aligns people. WAP. Well, this was a WAP conversation.
It so was.
All right, you have a great rest of the day. I know it's already nighttime over there, so enjoy your evening.
Yeah, you have a great day. Solidarity, everyone.
Bye, Nadia. Have a great
Uh,
one.
Bye,
Bye.
Monica.
Bye bye.